I'm thrilled to announce our second speaker today, Enrico Postiglione. Enrico holds a PhD from the University of Modena and Reggio Emilia. He was a visiting researcher at the University of Michigan, where he worked under the supervision of Professor Victor Caston, and the Université Panthéon-Sorbonne in France. His research in the philosophy of mind and metaphysics focuses primarily on ancient philosophy and its relationship with contemporary debates. He is the editor of a special issue of Archive entitled Ancient Perspectives on Technology, published in 2020, and has also published a series of articles on ancient philosophy, philosophy of mind, and philosophy of education. Today, he will be talking about Aristotle on Techne, reconsidering the nature-technology divide in light on Western Demonology. So, Enrico, I hand it over to you.
So thank you. First of all, thank you everyone and the organizer for inviting me to this very intriguing event. So as you said, my paper is entitled Aristotle on Techne, Reconsidering the Nature of Technology Divide in Light of Western Demonology. This means that I'll try to make a parallel between two intriguing strands in the history of Western Demonology and the contemporary approaches to the nature technology problem, and then try to provide a solution through Aristotle. So first of all, let me introduce a little bit of the problem, and also let me specify that given the context of a multidisciplinary workshop, so my presentation would be more theoretical than strictly textual. So I will be providing references, but not going exactly through Aristotle texts. So this said, I'll say that, of course, we all know today things like artificial intelligences, biomechanics, are all pieces of evidence of a new alleged ability to bend nature to our purposes. And apparently, there's a lot of debate that they seem to raise new and fundamental questions as they apparently provide a human subject with an almost infinite range of incoming possibilities. Of course, as a philosopher, and as all philosophers that do nowadays, questions emerge. So are there any problems implied by technology? Should we think of boundaries to be established for technological advancement? Are we entitled to exceed such limits? Are there any limits of sort? So as a result, today we get a big debate. Yet on a closer look, as we may all testimony, the puzzles concerning technology and human nature are not new. An example can come, for example, from the Burmese mythology. So the lucky traveler who joined a party, a Burmese party, would often notice floral compositions and fruits all around the sound system. Those are offerings to Mahagiri, a nut, namely a spirit, patron of technology science. He had been the son of a blacksmith and a blacksmith himself. So, of course, such an extension of the concept of technology from the product or the craft of a blacksmith and a high fidelity audio system seems to be philosophically relevant, as it it conceives, for example, of a silex flaked by Homo habilis 2 million years ago, and, for example, artificial intelligence as occurrences of the same activity, despite being enormously different in terms of complexity, of course. So this attitude seems to be conceivable nowadays, as intuitively we could agree that every technological behavior unfolds the very same tension against what would have been impossible in absence of that same behavior. So in other words, so between what would be apparently proper of a human being and the possibility of acquiring new properties through technology, there will be a tension. So, for example, if nature is meant to represent a certain set of laws and possibilities, then sentences like human beings cannot fly seem to make sense. But on the other way around, a technological behavior apparently overturns these alleged limits and allows human beings to fly with an aircraft or slash with a knife, for example. So from an evolutionary standpoint, this tension appears to be weaker than before. And indeed, every technological behavior should always and necessarily disclose nothing but a certain set of skills acquired during a species evolution. So quite fairly, whatever a human being is able to do and produce must be included within his or her behavioral patterns as a result of adaptation. So drawing on this kind of claims, the first categories of those looking at the nature technology, the debate as I see it, and I call them tech supporters, they claim that whatever can be done by a human being must fall within its possibility. So therefore, it must pertain to its nature. So according to this view, all technology should be natural. So as a consequence, transhumanism or any other faithful supporter of technology looks at the nature technology's bite as a conquest. So we have to save humanity from decay by complementing through technology what is naturally imperfect and then perfectible. So on the other way around, nature should be under attack and bound to perish. And technology is supposed to overcome nature one day or another. So the opposite view, I call the naturalist view. So there's some people who's not attracted by the idea that human nature changes in accordance and is influenced by technology. So for them, technological sophistication beyond certain limits endangers both nature understood as a complex system and human naturalness. So nature, according to naturalists, already provides reasonable limits within which good technology must be kept, so to prevent an unnatural ethical and technological decline. So the Eastern or Western demonology and mythology seems to me that has much to say about this divide between naturalists and tech supporters. So in the first section of my presentation, I'll try to prove that with some examples. So the first example is, of course, Prometheus. We learned from the wonderful presentation that preceded me a lot about Prometheus. And at the end of the presentation, we also specified, it's very famous for stealing fire. And indeed, he defied gods and gave fire to humanity. Well, tech supporters will claim that Prometheus is a humanist hero, integrating human nature with a new power. On the other way around, naturalists could say that Prometheus exceeded the boundaries of what was then supposed to be the nature of human beings. So another example could be Faust's deal with the devil, which reflects our ancestral aspiration to resist human finiteness and death, and our vain attempt to rise above nature. So deals with the forces of evil, alchemic experimentation, inventions, hubristic actions in ancient antiquity are in some sense nothing but previous attempts to address the same concerns the contemporary debate on technology faces nowadays. So all these attempts are attempts to overcome the limits of nature somewhat. So there are two intriguing strands in demonology. Of course, I will skip ancient Greek demonology for a while because of its neutrality, which is exactly what the kind of a solution I will be proposing at a later stage. So the human intimate desire to overcome nature has frequently been summarized by demonic entities who promise to free mankind from the bounds of nature. And this attitude, I'll try to show, is a long-standing one, but is much similar to what tech supporter says nowadays about technology. And on the other way around, those claiming that nature was perfect and then not perfectible, mostly because of religious beliefs. So nature reflected a sketch of God, so it must be perfect. So all demonic figures pertaining to this tradition, being a representation of doubts and dissatisfactions, were feared or later on mocked as attempts to destroy the divine order of nature. And this seems to be much to have much in common with contemporary naturalists. So the tension between those who support art technology and those who try to resist its temptation, so to preserve nature nowadays, seems to be a representation of the history of our demoniac beliefs. So early demonology is quite complicated. So when it comes to prehistoric times, it's not always easy to distinguish demonic figures from gods, because we have, of course, we lack information and paintings are not exactly clear. But North American cosmogonic myths already give an insight on, for at least for my purposes in this paper. So according to this kind of mythology, demonic figures aim to ruin the perfection of creation and are responsible for introducing death and disease into it. So somehow they represent the ancestral experience of the problematic aspects of reality. This kind of approach to demons stands for many kind of demonologies. It applies to Mesopotamian magical texts, to ancient Egyptian demons who always possess animal and horrific features, that testimony that idealization of death as a terrible and incomprehensible mystery, which is completely extraneous to nature. And even Islamic, Chinese, and Zoroastrian mythologies have some kind of demonic figures ruining nature somewhat. This kind of tradition flew into naturalist demonology. So early Christianity made of demonic figures something like the representatives of what falls beyond the limits of nature, but rather what we experience inside nature and see we're not able to understand. So Hebraism, for example, ascribed to Satan the role of the investigator and the representation of the personification of doves about nature. And this tradition goes on depicting the devil as someone who wants to deceive and someone we must fight against. As in the past, for example, in this tradition, we may have been tempted by the devil. Today, we are tempted by our technology to overcome the limits of an imperfect nature. But the tension between nature and technology in this path remain unaddressed. And we, of course, must rely on our in-principle assumption. So if we believe in God or we believe in nature as a kind of perfect thing, of course, we must resist the temptation of technology. On the other way around, we should endorse it. So it doesn't seem to be very helpful, at least philosophically. The second intriguing strand in the history of demonology is what I call the texopodes demonology. So when, with the advent of Renaissance and post-Renaissance, we were, mankind was stimulated by a new scientific passion, and indeed the figure of devils changed. Devil and demons came to offer science, knowledge, power, money through deals. So the temptation became rather intellectual. So for this reason, the devil has no need to deceive or frighten. He now possesses human features, appearing to human beings with no disguise. So in this part, accepting the intellectual offer of the devil is a free choice of the modern man. So who's well aware of what is at stake in such a deal, namely his eternal anxiety towards the boundaries of nature. So the importance of the theme of the pact with the devil in Western thought is expressed by the enormous number of works referring to it. I won't cite all of them. It's a really long tradition. You can just say William Blake, Christopher Marlowe, Lord Byron, Goethe, Pushkin, and so on. So it seems to me, of course, I can't discuss that for long, but whatever implication the last achievements of contemporary technology, whatever achievement contemporary technology acquire, the debate still polarizes on the idea of nature as something to be preserved or overcome. So it seems we have just two options open. So on the one hand, preserving nature, on the other hand, trusting the demon of technology in this case, as I call it. So the two strands in Western demonology reflect both an intrinsic contradiction that would hardly lead to a satisfactory answer to the problem of technology. Because on the one hand, of course, death is a dreadful affair for all of us. Yet on the other way around, the idea of a technological device that could lead to eternity appears to be puzzling and awful. So in front of the paradox of life and death, the risk of deciding in principle, so believed just by principles, is very high. So an alternative strand seems to come from Aristotle, of course, stands within Greek demonology that look at the demon in a neutral way. So in my view, Aristotle's conception of techne is very helpful in solving this kind of tension. So first of all, let me remind to all of you that at Physics 194a-13, Aristotle says, well, technology imitates nature. This raised a huge debate about those claiming that Aristotle was not detaching himself from Plato, was limiting the power of the technological enterprise because it was limited by nature. But I think things stand in a different way. Indeed, Aristotle also rejects the idea that technological production imitates natural production in the sense of exactly copying natural production processes. For him, what is at stake in this process of imitation is the purpose, not the object of production. For example, at Protrepticus B1314, he states that it's natural teleology to be exemplary for human technological activity. So nothing in Aristotle's text accounts to a defense of the integrity of nature against the allegedly counter-natural technological products of our time. He states that technology sometimes can implement or surpass what is perfectible and then imperfect in nature, in many of his works. And this is a reflection of Aristotle's views, metaphysical views, who lead him to accept the unity of the product of technology and the activity of production. So is this enough to say that Aristotle would consider all contemporary art technology as natural? Well, I don't think so. Indeed, for Aristotle, as Aristotle says at Physics 194a-32f, the only standards of technological perfection of nature are human purposes. So as human purposes indirectly pertain to the natural domain, in a second meaning, we can say that every product of technology is also natural. But on the other way around, if its telos, if the purpose of our technological activity is not natural, they could be natural or not in a different meaning. So usually today we use technology in reference to an endless variety of complex products resulting from human activity. So the Aristotelian conception of technology does not exclude this meaning, but includes it. So Aristotle uses techne also in relation to the activity itself and its purpose. So from an Aristotelian perspective, of course, as artificial intelligence or any other digital meanings is nothing but a consequence of our very advanced manufacturing mechanism. For example, it starts from the improvement of a hardware. We integrate a billion transistor and chips that then are able to perform billion operations. Then we got an AI. But in the same way, my shoes are a consequence of an advanced manufacturing system mechanism, which is just less advanced than artificial intelligence. So from the perspective of Aristotle, shoes are caused by the activity of the shoemaker who has produced them, being aware of his purpose, has imposed a certain form on an already existing matter, but the telos of my shoes, as well as their function, fall outside the product. So whether something good for the protection of my feet should be produced or not, whether or not artificial intelligence should be developed, whether a human being should be made immortal or not, these are not implications of technology as an activity. Techne, so technology is the activity of ordering what is suitable for a purpose, and then it is a potentially suitable material. This activity, however, is not simple production, nor necessarily resulting in a product. It's rather an intuition or how to improve something that does not improve intrinsically. So nature is productive in the sense of ordering what exists, but it's also the principle of persistence of the result of its own production. Technology instead is the intuition of a possibility that does not have its principle in nature, but still falls into the laws of nature. So metaphysically, even if a new Victor Frankenstein learns how to generate life from death, is not overcoming nature, but rather reorganizing natural constituents so that they become the archetypes of a new object that obeys to existing laws of nature. So this is the conclusion. And let me just add that the neutrality of Aristotle's ethical view of Techne stands in its purposes. So this is a good way to escape the divide between the demon of technology seen as a tempting opportunity or as a danger to nature, and gives back the debate on art technology to its proper dimension, namely the purpose of its action and usefulness towards the wellness of our species. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrico. I was wondering whether you could give us a few more examples of these tendency to refer to natural as a model for technology. For instance, the examples still reference to Aristotle, with which I'm more familiar are those coming from the biological writings. So I'm thinking, for instance, about the parts of animals and how Aristotle, description, for instance, of the camel, that is particularly striking, the number of stomachs of an animal, which is directly linked to the structure of their teeth, basically, and the famous quotation, which is, nature does not anything in vain. So I was wondering whether you were considering that as well in your discussion about nature as a model for Techne.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I just want to give you as an answer a very small quotation, which seems to be the best way to answer your concern. For example, in the Generazione Animalium, which was, I was trying to find the passage, but it takes too much time because I can't remember it exactly, but it's compared, for example, octopuses to ships. So in my view, we have to distinguish when Aristotle wants to make it's different if, when Aristotle wants to establish a resemblance between technology and nature from an ethical point of view or from a metaphysical one. So when Aristotle talks, because Techne is part of, is an activity, so it's a mode of thought. So in this respect, Aristotle, mentioned in physics and in all biological works of Generazione Animalium, it makes a lot of comparisons between animals and technological artifacts. What I think is that those comparisons are not to be taken as metaphysically laden. Let me say that. I think that teleology is the key answer to understand the parallelism Aristotle makes between technology and nature. So technology can imitate nature in its purposes, of course, cannot imitate nature, can only imitate nature metaphysically, but not everything is natural according to its purpose. So it seems to me that, for example, I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer, Enrico. We have a question from Costanze, who says, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned hubris earlier on when talking about Faust, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on the role of hubris in putting boundaries to technological advancement.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. The hubris is pertain to the first strand of demonology, what I call the naturalist demonology. Hubris is exactly is a key concept in understanding later Christian and account of demonology. So I'm trying to say that hubris is not a key concept in Greek demonology, because Greek demonology is mainly grounded on a neutral account of demons. So ancient Greek demons can be good or evil. So hubris, of course, can be seen as a moral, ethical limit to technological advancement. But my discussion of hubris is that it's a key concept in understanding later traditions, because the concept of hubris, namely defying gods as humans, and so the attempt to acquire powers who do not pertain to the natural status of human beings. It's very much to say about the advent of sin in the history of our relation with nature. So when early Christianity put on the conception of sin in Western thought, in Western demonology, so our relation with technology changed, and hubris becomes a key concept, even if it's outside the birthplace of ancient Greek culture. Because on the Scholastic, for example, take on this concept in very different words, but saying again that the sketch of nature should be preserved rather than challenged, and all our accounts, all our technological advancement should respect somehow the limits imposed to us by ethics. So in this respect, I think, yes, staying into the ancient Greek culture, I would rather say that given that ancient Greek gods are more anthropomorphic, hubris has much is much more related to an ethical relation with gods, who stands in a kind of religious tension with the gods. But as for the nature technology debate, I think definitely hubris is a key concept. So thank you for the question.